Imagine a country where immigrants contribute more to the economy than they cost. Denmark went from having one of Europe's most restrictive immigration policies to becoming a model for successful integration. What if I told you that Denmark's solution to the immigration crisis wasn't about building walls or closing borders? Instead, they found a way to turn immigration into a national strength. Picture a country where immigrants feel welcome, contribute to society, and help boost the economy. That's Denmark today. We'll explore the surprising strategies that transformed Denmark's approach to immigration. In a world where immigration often sparks heated debates, Denmark stands out as a beacon of success. This small Scandinavian nation has managed to turn what many countries see as a challenge into a national strength. How? Through a unique approach that combines pragmatism with compassion. It may come as a surprise to know that Denmark has had one of the shortest histories with immigration in Europe. A low migration country, Denmark has for centuries been primarily a land of immigrants. This trend started to change 60 years ago. Denmark was experiencing an economic boom, hence featuring labor shortages in its key sectors, when it began to actively recruit guest workers from Turkey, Pakistan, and Yugoslavia. Now fast forward to today, and Denmark faces a very different immigration landscape. As of 2021, immigrants and their descendants constitute about 14% of the Danish population. In a country of only 5.8 million, that was more than 800,000 people. This is put into consideration. It's like the total population of San Francisco that suddenly all migrated to Denmark. Countries like Sweden and Germany have slightly higher percentages of immigrants, while others like Finland and Poland have lower rates. One of the most uniquely fascinating aspects about Denmark's immigration outlook is how and when it has evolved. However, during the 1980s and 1990s, Denmark witnessed a large influx of asylum applicants, in particular from conflict regions in the Middle East and Africa. This change also created new conflicts in the society. Denmark has more recently been attracting many labor migrants from other EU countries. Officially, the largest immigrant groups of this date are Poland, Syria, and Turkey, but numbers only tell part of the story. What's really shaped Denmark's immigration landscape is how these demographic changes have played out in Danish society. In contrast to other countries where new arrivals tend to head for the metropolis, Denmark has provided a strategy with areas up and down its territory. In other words, first-time refugees are spread all over, from the capital of Copenhagen to austere villages. Denmark also differs in that it combines integration with immigration right from the start. Denmark does not trap immigrants in legal limbo for years, as some countries do. The only delays are caused by whether their asylum application has been processed yet. This proactive stance has contributed to an immigration environment where newcomers are almost required, if not compelled by fear or expectation alone, to assimilate into Danish society at great haste. This is a world of language classes, job training programs, and cultural orientation courses, classrooms that are designed to make migrants into as Danish new Danes. For Denmark, the issue is to establish a system as quickly as feasible that can turn newcomers into full-fledged contributors of society. Language instruction, a mainstay of this process. At this point, you might say to yourself, well, of course, language classes remain a consistent format. However, Denmark does not rest there. They provide Danish intensive language classes that are not only about spending time with words and grammar, but also about familiarizing yourself with the way things are done in Denmark. Principles of society. The first step is mandatory for almost every immigrant and refugee to make sure people have a basic knowledge of communication and culture. Of course, language is only the tip of the iceberg, but Denmark's integration programs go well beyond the classroom. These efforts include job training, mentorship programs, and even a friend-family program that pairs new arrivals with Danes for cultural exchange. In practice, it's a kind of all-encompassing welcome kit that helps immigrants find their feet in the country. A bit deeper down the policy rabbit hole, there's Denmark and its one-of-a-kind cultural education strategy. It is not only a question about how to teach Danish norms for immigrants, but it goes both ways, building empathy between people who are new and people who have been living here forever. In Denmark, they provide cultural programs as well, workshops, and the community comes together in building a shared community. These priority areas differ from other parts of the world where most countries will concentrate on either language acquisition or job placement. This is a life-wide approach in which integration is seen as taking place everywhere. In response, they developed a range of policies related to housing, education, employment, and social engagement that would all key into one another in creating an easier pathway for new arrivals. Buried in the policy policy details weigh on down are several fascinating initiatives. In Denmark, for example, immigrants are encouraged to live in countryside towns rather than filling big cities. One is to spread the gains of migration more evenly across the country and prevent immigrants from simply colonizing a few places. Denmark has had higher levels of immigrant employment, language competency, and civic engagement than many other European countries. Quite some objective success there. In a society with their approach, we have the feeling that many immigrants feel more included and can contribute. Remember, though, that no system is perfect. Denmark's model has its critics and challenges, but by focusing on comprehensive integration and adapting to changing needs, Denmark has created an immigration approach that many other countries are now studying and even emulating. Having looked at the immigration landscape in Denmark, you might be wondering. The second main policy emphasizes participation in civic life. Local communities and democratic processes are opened up for immigrants in Denmark. This could mean joining local clubs or associations, attending community events and programs, even running for public office at the town level. The point is that it's not just learning the language or finding a job. Integration means becoming part of society. Flexibility is another unique feature of the Danish model. Policies are not cast in stone. They change often as we get a better understanding of what works and what doesn't. That willingness to change and grow has been key to Denmark's resilient approach, but it's also worth noting that these policies are not without their critics. They have been criticized as overly punitive, aiming to force immigrants into fitting in, while others argue that they are too weak. Nevertheless, in general, they appear to have been successful as instruments of integration and social cohesion. The Danish model reminds us that successful immigration policies must take care to be comprehensive, flexible, and oriented toward long-term integration, with an emphasis on the importance of being able to speak and understand local languages, play a meaningful role in one's own community while receiving special support for newcomers with refugee status. This active approach has helped Denmark create an impressive mechanism by which new members can be channeled as quick contributors. It is an inspiration more and more countries across the world are considering adopting in response to the challenges they face with immigration. Education is central to Denmark and integration in general, though the country's practices go far beyond classrooms, and it begs the question of how Norway, a small country where integration is working so well and which has very little social unrest related to immigration, achieves this. So in Denmark, they advocate a diversity of social integration strategies that together establish communities for Danes and newcomers alike. One of the fascinating aspects associated with this approach is around hygge, Danish for coziness and togetherness, and the government has, cleverly so, incorporated this cultural value into its integration efforts. Danish municipalities regularly hold hygge events, for example, where new arrivals can mix with the locals over a meal or do activities together. More than just fun events, these festivals are about breaking down walls and building bridges between cultures. However, social cohesion initiatives in Denmark go deeper than informal meetings. There are a variety of programs around the country to help make immigrants feel like Danes and not just brown-skinned people living in Denmark. In a program called the Mentor Family, for example, Danish families agree to help immigrant families settle into their new life in Denmark, assuming everything from teaching about basic local culture to job searches. This personal touch goes a long way to helping new members feel valued and supported. Having looked at how Denmark has integrated immigrants in the labor market thus far, it also seems worthwhile to explore another dimension of their success story: education. So how does Denmark make sure immigrant children keep up at school? The answer is a combination of effective policies ranging from education to equalization. The program of education that Denmark teaches the children who are immigrants is just amazing. The school has set up a system to help these kids not only gain back what they lost, but in many cases go on and excel. Let's start with language. To avoid language barriers standing in the way of successful learning, special intensive courses are also offered by schools to students who speak less commonly used languages. These are not just after-school programs. They take place during the regular school day so that immigrant children have a wraparound of services without being isolated from their classmates. In Denmark, statistics have shown that in some lines of study, the second-generation immigrants perform as good, if not better, than their Danish-born counterparts. By comparison, in most countries, children of immigrants generally lag. Immigrants and their descendants have contributed to Denmark's economic growth over the past few years. In 2019, they represented about 14% of the overall workforce. For example, these numbers are part of the labor force and they have been trending up. But what does this actually look like? Let us say you are the owner of a business in Denmark. If your community is a recent hub for immigrants, you have access to an increased number of potential employees with different skills and experiences. This diversity can improve innovation and productivity. Actually, something that has been shown in other studies is is, companies with a more diverse workforce tend to perform better than their less inclusive competitors. Now let's talk about taxes. One of the most enduring myths is that immigrants are a net drain on public resources, except in Denmark, the data suggests otherwise. With some lags, immigrants invest their taxes back into the U.S. tax system. That is, they pay more in taxes than the value of public benefits that accrue to them. Immigrants in Denmark are also establishing new companies. These startup companies produce jobs and also contribute to economic vibrancy because of the ingenuity they bring. In Copenhagen alone, immigrants own about 20% of all businesses, despite making up a smaller percentage of the population. For its part, Denmark is playing for nearly double-digit GDP growth over the next few decades by current immigration policies. As the native-born population grows older, immigrants and their offspring may be called upon to supply labor to sustain our workforce. That said, it's worth mentioning that these economic gains did not come out of nowhere. These decisions are the outcome of deliberate policy design and conduct. Denmark has prioritized the successful labor market integration, language training, and education of its immigrant population, unlocking their economic success. Naturally, the impact of economics is so much more than figures on a balance sheet, and it's about real people and real lives. Thanks to the economic opportunities Denmark's policies supply many immigrants with, they have been able to make a better life for themselves and their family. This, in turn, contributes to social stability and cohesion, creating a positive feedback loop that benefits the entire society. So the next time you hear someone claim that immigration is bad for the economy, you might want to point them towards Denmark's example. It shows that with the right policies and approach, immigration can be a powerful driver of economic growth and prosperity. Denmark has had excellent results with immigration, but not without its challenges and criticisms. Even though Denmark already has fairly tight controls, critics fear the residency and citizenship requirements could scare off skilled workers that Denmark's economy needs to grow. For an illustrative example, many believe that the language proficiency tests for permanent residency are too difficult for some in specialized fields where English is their daily working profession. Another contentious issue is the so-called jewelry law, which enables authorities to seize assets from asylum seekers as payment for their upkeep in Denmark. While the government argues this is a fair way to distribute costs, human rights organizations have condemned it as dehumanizing and potentially traumatizing for people who have already fled difficult circumstances. Many critics argue that the programs are too watered down. Critics say they focus too heavily on assimilation and not enough on multiculturalism, creating a culturally homogeneous society. It has fueled an ongoing debate about whether that approach ensures immigrants maintain their personal cultural identities or is so demanding as to homogenize them into a Danish way of life. Proponents argue that the policies of Denmark seemingly have a disparate impact on specific groups as well. A key criticism is that the changes, some of which were only proposed last week, make it appear as though fears about Muslims are being singled out as part of a blanket crackdown. For example, critics claim that face coverings in public places are aimed particularly at Muslim women, niqabs and burqas. Economically, it has been good, but I guess the costs for integration programs that is a long-term benefit and would definitely pay off in the future are short-term. What could have been done better? A few taxpayers and politicians contend that these costs are too great, especially in periods of weak economic activity. In addition, it is debatable how easily Denmark's model could be brought to bear in other countries. But critics note that Denmark is easier than larger, more diverse countries to craft such policies. This way of going about business might be harder to replicate in larger, more heterogeneous nations. Continuing challenges include the integration of immigrant women into the labor market. Male immigrants in particular were able to claw back some of their losses on the jobs front, but female newcomers are still struggling. This might mean that we need to do a better job reaching out with programs or strategies specifically tailored for immigrant women. They also specifically call for further steps to address discrimination. Shoehorned into the integration debate are facts about where first-generation immigrants and their children really stand in Danish society, from job applications through to problems getting a place to live. Finally, we are faced with the task of holding ourselves together in a time when diversity is on overdrive. While Denmark has made strides in this area, there are still instances of social tension and segregation in some communities. These challenges and criticisms highlight that Denmark's approach, while innovative and largely successful, is not a perfect solution. They underscore the complexity of managing immigration and integration, reminding us that even seemingly successful models require ongoing evaluation and adjustment. There are a lot of problems and criticisms with how Denmark's immigration system system has been executed, but graduating school seems one way to address the problem. Other nations should consider DPI. The question arises then, what can the world take away from Denmark's experience? First, the forest view. However, Denmark's success didn't come overnight or without help. It was the product of a selective policy approach, normal human adjustments, and an ear that heard criticism well over time. This holistic attitude may act as one of the most critical messages for other states. A critical learning is in the adaptation of integration strategies to local circumstances. The headline here is, of course, that what works in Copenhagen might not work in Cairo or Canberra, because every country has its culture, economy, and social environment that cannot be applied to others. Denmark's fair welfare state, for example, undergirded integration efforts. Countries with different economic systems might need to find alternative ways to provide support. Language learning and academic education, too. The integration of the Danish society and economy is paying off Denmark's investments in these areas. Although the specifics of implementation may differ, prioritizing language training and educational accessibility for immigrants could be a valuable experience that other countries can take home as well. Also interesting is the Danish model in labor market integration. By matching skills assessment with job training and incentives for employers, Denmark has turned immigration around to a net economic positive. This approach can be tailored to various labor markets and economic necessities throughout the globe, the Danish model. But Denmark is not everything forest as well. Some of Denmark's policies have been easier to implement as a consequence of its smaller size and relatively homogeneous population. The same types of approaches are likely not feasible for larger and more diverse countries.